Hello. So honored to be here during this conversation with all this energy in the room. And the thing that we want to talk about right now is the money end of things. We want to talk about fines and fees and bail. And this is a topic that's especially near and dear to my heart as somebody who reported on economics and money and inequality for a really long time. So the question about money bail, about fines and fees, and how they're interwoven into the criminal justice system seems to be happening everywhere. So my question is, how is this conversation different in New Orleans than it is in other places? Rafael, I will start with you.
Well, I think what you're seeing in New Orleans is a reflection of decades of policy on the state level. So the state mandates certain criminal justice agencies, and they usually provide the funding for the elected official and maybe a portion of the staff, but they haven't funded those agencies, so those agencies become the responsibility of the local parishes and municipalities to fund all the support that's needed to effectively run those operations, and there's not enough money. So what the state did is they began to pass fines and fees and user fees to fund the criminal justice system. So fundamentally, the problems that we're experiencing in New Orleans are no different than any other parish in the state. It's probably accentuated because of the population of the city of New Orleans, the numbers involved in it. But fundamentally, one of the things that I think is missing from this forum is the state of Louisiana. They share a responsibility in burdening local criminal justice systems all over the state by providing insufficient resources to deal with the criminal justice issues that the city is mandated to provide.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you all agree. Ursula, I want to go over there to you. What is the biggest difference? What's the biggest challenge that New Orleans is facing in terms of fines and fees?
Well, I do think that New Orleans is unique. We are unique, first of all, in that the people who are being affected are individuals and unique. And I am encouraged by the fact that this community has developed a vision for reforming its court system that was developed by the impacted people. And that is going to be the strength of our work. It is going to be our accountability and the wisdom of being involved and being directly affected is going to make what we put together here so much more effective. That's the positive. I think the negative, though, is quite frankly, Louisiana is way behind everyone. I'm from Mississippi. We normally say, at least we're not Mississippi. Even Mississippi has reformed fines and fees, and we are behind the 8 ball. I am encouraged by the consensus I see in this room, but now is the time for action, and I hope that that action remains respectful of the directly affected people.
Yeah. Judge, do you agree that New Orleans, Louisiana is particularly behind when it comes to this issue?
So I would agree that New Orleans is behind, and that's why in last year, 2018, July of 2018, the judges of juvenile court voted in en banc to eliminate fines and fees. So we no longer charge fines and fees to indigent families. If you come in and you are already proven to be indigent, the children are indigent. They do not have the money to pay for fines and fees. So why, as a judge, am I going to put an additional barrier in place? And we felt that it was really important that this was a rule that we adopted because obviously this position, this seat will remain, and so long after I am gone, I want this change to remain constant. So it wasn't enough that if I got a particular case and I got a family that the child was adjudicated delinquent, or sometimes the children even plead. They say, hey, I have done this, I want to step up and say what I've done, and I have to then impose a fee. So what type of hardship and burden am I going to place on the family, on the individual? I may have some cases where the alleged victim is a parent or caregiver. So I'm telling that parent or caregiver that you then have to come in on top of it and pay fines and fees. And then when I looked at how I was elected, I am not a debtor's court. So what do I do with these fines and fees? So you don't pay them. So I'm using additional resources, additional taxpayer dollars, additional court time to collect fines and fees that When they do come in, or if they don't come in to pay them, then what do I do with that? So then am I supposed to issue an attachment for mom who actually called in and said, this child needs some help, can you offer some assistance, called into the New Orleans police, told somebody at the school, that results in an arrest, that results in an adjudication, that results in a delinquent disposition, and then I'm charging fines and fees? So it just didn't feel right. So I could not wait for the state of Louisiana. I could not wait for everybody to come together and say, you know what, this is not a good idea. We're going to change law. And so we decided as our benches that we would change policy. And so what our policy has implemented is that we no longer charge fines and fees to the individuals that come before our court.
Ivy, before I move on to my next question, I want to know if you had anything to add to that.
No, I mean, I just want to echo what Ursula is saying about the really, I think, important role that community organizations directly impacted people have been playing in the positive developments here. Things like warrant clinics organized by Stand With Dignity, who's in the room today. Ordinance passed 1 or 2 years ago, getting rid of most money bail in misdemeanor court. I think that was all the result of a lot of grassroots effort.
Yeah. Ursula, I want to go back to something you talked about, and Ivy, you just touched on this. I think a lot of times when we talk about policy in this big way, especially when we talk about money, people's eyes can glaze over a little bit, and they think about it as kind of this big thing. They don't think about it at the human level, at the family level, at the personal level. What is the impact of having money bail, of having this system of fines and fees on individual families?
Oh, man, the impact is destabilizing economically, and that is what originally motivated us to engage this, but the impact ripples so much further. We initially realized that through work we were doing to get local hire ordinances, our people still could not get those jobs because they had warrants for the city of New Orleans for outstanding fines and fees, right? So already we were seeing that people were locked out of opportunity, socially immobilized by this fines and fees system. But also people are having to make really difficult choices. I'm a fairly privileged person. I got in a traffic accident a month ago, and I disagreed with the police officer, but he decided that I was at fault and gave me a ticket, right? I'm like, great, I can't wait for my day in court. I do my legal research, I bring in all the ordinances to prove that I, yes, can, in fact, go around a left-turning vehicle. And, and I appear in court half a dozen times. Never once do I get to see a judge. The only conversation I'm having is with the city attorney who keeps reducing the amount that I have to pay, trying to negotiate a payment from me. There was never any due process in that experience. Now, I have the privilege of being able to go to court half a dozen times instead of be at my job. I have the privilege to be able to pay an attorney to fight for me. And I still, in the end, was like, you know what? I have no more time to invest in this. Here's your $120. How do you think that plays out for someone who has none of my resources and has to make difficult choices about paying rent, providing for their family, their medical needs? We have, by some estimations, 50,000 people in this small city right now who are living with that precarious situation, because let's not forget, not only do they owe a debt, that is a criminalized debt. So they're always looking over their shoulder. People are afraid to drive, to apply for jobs, to get city services, to even come to the warrant clinic to clear the warrants, because they know that they're subject to arrest at any one of those experiences. We got to do better. People don't deserve this, and it's not benefiting us. We do not see that we are safer from this. We are not in a financially better position from this. Our community is not benefiting. Our community is screaming for a change.
I want to talk about that idea of not being safer from this. You know, a lot of the pushback that I would get when I was reporting on these issues is that there needs to be some form of accountability. There needs to be some consideration of public safety, which is people were using as kind of the undergirding support for bail as an idea. We talked about it a little earlier today, the idea of violent versus nonviolent crime and trying to draw a line there, but the question about what even constitutes a violent crime and should people be held for that. How do you respond to the idea of fines, fees, and particularly money bail to people who say that there needs to be some level of accountability and safety, and that inflicting bail, money bail in particular, helps to prop up that system. Judge, I will start with you.
Well, first off, whether or not someone can afford to pay a bond, a bail, or fees does not make the city safer. So whether or not somebody comes before my court and their family has the ability to put up the money for a bond does not ensure that anybody in this room would be any safer from something else happening. That's number one. Number two is that most often the people who lack the ability to pay for these bonds, fines, and fees are African American and also are indigent. So we're also looking at a huge disparity in the people that are able to be released and are not able to be released. In addition to that, there was some conversation earlier about the percentages of African Americans at the Youth Study Center, in the place where juvenile offenders are held. First, we have to stop arresting the majority of African Americans. Since I have sat on this bench for the last 9 years, there are very few amount of people that I see other than African American, male and female. So that's number one. There's going to be a disparity when that's really the amount of people that you have seen that are being arrested. In addition to that, you are not allowing children, because the people that I service and the people that I see are children. And so if a child comes in and is charged on a particular offense, and we feel that that child may be a danger to themselves or a danger to others, most certainly we look at a whole host of other factors. But when those children come in, it's their initial appearance, it's the first time they're coming into court, there's so many other factors that may have led to why they're there. Trauma, mental health, school-related issues, parental involvement, a host of things that we don't know what they may or may not be dealing with. And so unless we start tackling those issues and we start looking at those other factors, because if you look at some of the things that have happened in the city in the last couple of weeks and some of the juveniles that have passed away that have been highly publicized in the media, those are not kids that have necessarily come in on an offense that would have even required or recognized or requested bail. Those kids would have been automatically released. So while we are discussing issues of fines and fees and bail and bonds, we have to look at what is bringing and what causes these kids to come into this system? What is our city lacking? And to be able to sit in a room of community leaders and people who are doing things outside of this system, that we all need to collaborate and come together to bring our services together. Because while we use fear and we talk about if you're safe and if you can go outside and if somebody's pulling on your car door, we have to look at the bigger issues that are bringing those kids right back into that system, right back further entrenched. And certainly we are not promoting any public safety by holding more and more and more of them in jail.
Right. Rafael, I saw you nodding. Did you have something to add?
Right. So, I mean, the topic of this panel is follow the money. Mm-hmm. So money bail is subjective, and violent offenders are defined by state law. So my earlier comment was that part of the reason that we're dealing with these issues right now is decades of legislators passing laws that have put us in this position. Mm. So if you are arrested for what's defined by a crime of violence and certain other drug offenses, you're not entitled to free bond. Mm-hmm. So how does New Orleans get from where we are to where everyone in this room wants to see us be? So I think one of the ways that you do that is to take a look at how do we work around the limitations that the existing laws have. One of the ways that I think you can do that is to create a more comprehensive pretrial release program. So I've been meeting with some of the people that have been advocating for the abolition of money bail. And one of the cities that they tout is Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And Washington, D.C. for decades has not imposed money bail, even on violent offenders. So I took a look at what their pretrial services programs look like. The budget for their pretrial services program is $65 million in Washington, D.C. So if we are interested in changing what we're doing, it's not just about releasing the jail population, because the jail population in Orleans Parish now is about 93% felony offenders. And the misdemeanor offenders have just been arrested and they're going to process out. So if we want to meaningfully reduce the jail population, then we're going to have an investment in meaningful pretrial services. If we want to do away with fines and fees, then the cities and the parishes are going to have to fund the operations of the criminal justice system to a greater extent that they are. That's the money realities. And unless and until we do that, we'll be talking about this next year and 5 years from now.
All right. I have a few more questions for our panel, but I do want to let the audience know that we will be coming to you for questions as well. So start thinking about them now, making them nice and short so other people can get theirs in too. Thank you. Ivy, you are involved right now in some litigation with SPLC in relation to private entities that are charging fines and fees. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you're hoping to accomplish in that litigation.
Yeah, so in terms of the hard decisions that I think was mentioned before that families face under the current system, right now 97% of people who have money bail set in the criminal district court here can't actually afford the amount of the bail, and that puts them in this position of having to either let their loved ones languish in jail or turn to a commercial for-profit bail bond company. And so currently, we're representing a family, the Aganas, that Stand With Dignity put us in touch with, who had a really horrible experience with their bail bond company. They were overcharged by, I think, almost twice the amount that they had contracted to pay and that they are legally allowed to be charged. And the company basically used the arrest power, essentially, that they have over, someone who is out on pretrial release to extort and coerce payment from his family. They would pick him up, handcuff him, take him to their office, and hold him there until someone brought money to basically purchase his freedom for a little while longer. And this happened several times. So this is something that we are trying to eradicate. There are just spaces that the profit motive should not enter at all, particularly when these private companies are able to use the threat of incarceration against people. And I think it's also important to look ahead to, when we start to see a reduction in money bail, to be very careful about ensuring that these for-profit actors do not enter that space. Ankle monitoring companies, private supervision companies, I think these are all things that we really need to guard against, be on the lookout for.
All right. Before we go to the audience, we're going to do a lightning round. I want each of you to tell me what you think the one thing is that needs to happen next to help ensure and crystallize better equity, particularly when it comes to economic inequality in the criminal justice system in New Orleans. Ursula, I'm so sorry, but I am going to start with you.
Okay. One thing. Okay. Decriminalize the fines and fees. Remove the warrants, provide amnesty for those who have outstanding warrants, and change the system so that non-appearance is not automatically a criminal warrant.
All right. Ivy?
Oh my gosh. I mean, we need to adequately fund our courts, but while we're doing that, we need to make sure that the courts are held accountable to not incarcerating people who can't afford to pay, and to making sure those protections are in place.
All right. Judge?
Services, additional services for youth, access to all the programs that exist in our city, in our state, all over, and giving access to indigent juveniles that come through the system. Reaching out to us. We don't have all the resources, we don't have all the staff, but if you know a program, something that works, something that these kids can participate in, that you don't automatically not include them because of their past, that they are not automatically pushed out because of their contact with the system, but that they have a seat at the table. If you give them an opportunity, I promise you, they will take advantage of it. These kids deserve a second chance, and the people in this room can make that happen.
Rafael?
The criminal justice system is the what? The why is crime. And if you want to reduce crime, I think the greatest investment that this or any community can make is in education. Because if the children are educated, that means that they can find jobs and they don't come into the system. So if you want to really change, fundamentally change, we need to do a better job with our education system.
Okay. Let's go to our audience for questions. I know we have one right there.
Good morning. Caroline Durham. I'm working to create a world without prisons for good.
All right.
Want to talk about follow the money? We're talking about fines after the fact. The Times-Picayune in 2016 said we're spending $113 a day to house people at Orleans Parish Prison. That's $40,228 a year per person. $145 million for a new jail. What happens if we take that $40,228 and invest in the person and the families in the communities instead of talking about after the fact? I'd love to hear from the panel about how we take this money and we put it in the communities to empower. I grew up here, I was born uptown, and we can't have this.
All right, can we have one person tackle that? Ursula, you look like you got some thoughts.
I mean, I'm loving it. That is a people solution, right? That's the kind of like brilliance that folks can come up with if you just give them the opportunity to like make decisions about their own lives, right? I think that it would be very amazing to see that $40,000 be invested in a family, and I think there are mechanisms already in place in our community for that to happen. We have already experimented with community-based public safety programs. We've seen way back pre-Katrina in the St. Thomas, the peacekeepers and people like that find a way for the community to create its own safety. What would it look like to give a group like that the $40,000 instead of, all due respect, Sheriff Gusman? I would much rather see our services, our education, our GED programs be done by people who actually use the service and know how best to deliver it.
And just a piece of it is, we in New Orleans are a place of abundance. Step away from lack, folks. New Orleans is a place of abundance, and if we own that and we come from that and we reconfigure this, these meetings become about something very different.
All right, let's move on to next question. There we go.
Good morning, y'all. I'm Toya, lead organizer with Stand with Dignity. And we got some warrant clinics coming up in 2019, so tell you folks if they got warrants and fines and fees. I wanted to speak to the fact that, Mr. Rafael, you said that state law defines what's criminal. Once upon a time, state law defined who should be enslaved. And we're in a place where we've abolished that, right? I think we got to start thinking abolition. I think we got to start dreaming of a world without prisons, a world that's not putting people in crippling situations. Yeah. How do we get to first acknowledging the flaws in our state law and changing that? I had to make it a question.
Well,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
so unfortunately, crime has been a human weakness and problem that we've been dealing with, from forever. So the laws that are passed that local law enforcement arrests and prosecutes and judges sentence on are passed on the state level. They're not passed in the city of New Orleans. So I think some of the movements, some of the grassroots initiatives that are in New Orleans, they need to extend to the state capitol. They need to extend to all of the parish, all of the legislators, and all of the senators in the state of Louisiana.
All right, I know this
we
is...
coming, don't worry.
Right.
I know this is...
Right, and I'll add to that, that you've got to talk to the people who actually write this. You have to get to Baton Rouge, have your voice heard, speak out about it, and if it doesn't sound right, because I have to implement the laws. So once the laws are in effect, they're on the books, then obviously I have to rule according to that. Otherwise, I get appealed by the Supreme Court, I get appealed by the lawyers, and then we go to the appellate court and then to the Supreme Court. So if you really want to affect change, you need to sit down and talk to people about how that looks, because these laws that are on the books are antiquated. We're only touching a tip of the iceberg here, but there are so many things and how crimes are defined and what is the definition in if you commit one and you commit another, and how then it's so convoluted that that's where the work begins, because when it comes in front of me, I have to apply what's already in place. Now I can push the envelope and we try things, and I'm sure there's some of the defense lawyers that are in here as well as some of the district attorneys that know we will try to create and affect change, but it has to start with us giving a voice to this. Does it make sense? There are laws that are on the books in regard to juvenile offenders and the ability that they have to have access to their family, they have access to the rights that they should receive, that are so outdated and need to be reviewed and need to be looked at. But this is where it has to start, because once it comes to us, I have to put in place what's already there.
All right. And I know we could be up here all day talking about this. Please join me in thanking our panelists for their time.